this world, the loud ones fall first, because noise exposes weakness, and silence exposes truth. A man who learns to keep his mouth shut, even when he's angry, hurt, or betrayed, becomes untouchable. Today, I'll show you why silence isn't just a habit. It's a weapon, one that builds power, protects your mind, and turns you into the kind of man people fear and follow. If you're tired of being misunderstood, underestimated, or controlled by emotion, this is where it stops. This is where you learn the strength that only silence can give. Silence is the purest form of power. There's a reason the most dangerous men in history rarely raised their voice. They understood something the world still hasn't learned. Silence is not weakness. Silence is restraint, discipline, and power condensed. People think strength is in action, fists on the table, shouting in the street, words thrown like bullets. But the strongest men, the ones you remember, are the ones who knew when not to speak. The man who controls his tongue controls his world. Because speaking is easy, anyone can make noise. But silence requires a mind that isn't ruled by emotion. When Thomas Shelby walks into a room, the first thing he does isn't talk. He watches. He lets the room breathe, lets the tension rise, lets other men grow uncomfortable. Because silence exposes people. You'd be shocked at how quickly a loud man collapses into honesty when he's speaking to someone who refuses to break the quiet. While they ramble, he listens. While they reveal their motives, he analyzes. While they react emotionally, he stays still, thinking, calculating. Silence is strategic. It gives you time to assess, time to reflect, time to understand what everyone else is too distracted to see. Most people don't think before they speak. They speak so they don't have to think. But the man who speaks last speaks with clarity, intention, and precision. And that is why silence is power. Silence also protects you. Every word you give the world is a piece of you. Your thoughts, your fears, your weaknesses, your desires. And once it's out there, you can't take it back. People use it, twist it, weaponize it. But what they don't know, they can't attack. What they don't understand, they can't predict. A silent man becomes unreadable, and an unreadable man is feared. Thomas Shelby isn't silent because he has nothing to say. He's silent because he knows the world doesn't deserve to hear everything he thinks. He saves his words for when they matter. For when a single sentence can shift a room, turn allies into soldiers, or stop enemies in their tracks. Silence is the mark of a man who doesn't chase validation. He doesn't need the room to know how smart he is. He doesn't need applause for every thought. He doesn't need the world to agree with him. He thinks for himself, moves for himself, and speaks only when the situation demands it. And that type of man becomes dangerous. Silence also sharpens you internally. When you're quiet, you're forced to confront your own thoughts. That's where discipline grows, where emotional control rises, where you learn to handle pain, stress, betrayal, without collapsing, without reacting, without showing the world your vulnerability. A man who can sit in silence with his own suffering. He is a man who can survive anything. Because out there in the streets, in business, in life, people will test you. They'll push you. They'll try to provoke you. They'll want you to react, to break, to fold. And the moment you open your mouth out of anger or fear, you lose control. But if you stay silent, if you breathe, if you think instead of reacting, you become untouchable. Silence is power, because silence is control. Control over yourself, control over your environment, control over the narrative, control over the outcome. And when a man has that kind of control, there's nothing the world can take from him. Quiet men see what loud men miss. Most people think power comes from talking, from proving yourself, explaining yourself, announcing your every intention. But the truth is, the loudest man in the room is usually the blindest. He's too focused on being heard to notice what's happening around him, too focused on winning attention to realize he's losing information. and information. That's where real power lives. Quiet men understand this. Men like Thomas Shelby don't listen to respond, they listen to reveal. Every silence is a chance to study the world. Every pause is an opportunity to observe the truth beneath what people pretend to be. While others rush to speak, to fill the air, to dominate conversations, the quiet man stands back and watches. That's why he sees everything the loud men miss. Because when you're not trying to be noticed, you notice everything. A quiet man sees the small things. A twitch in someone's eye, the shake in their voice, the hesitation before they answer. These minor cracks tell you more about a person's intentions than any speech ever could. Loud men talk in noise. Quiet men hear in detail. And in every negotiation, every confrontation, every conflict, the details are where the truth hides. Thomas Shelby doesn't need a man to confess to know he's lying. He sees the lie in how the man breathes, in how he avoids eye contact, in the way his hands stiffen when money or betrayal is mentioned. Loud men miss these things because they're too busy speaking. But the quiet man, he pays attention to the world the way a hunter watches the forest, slow, deliberate, patient. Nothing escapes him. Silence sharpens perception. It heightens awareness. When you train yourself to stay quiet, your mind becomes sharper than any weapon. You see angles, motives, strategies, and weaknesses. You see who respects you, and who envies you, who fears you, and who plans to deceive you. Loud men only know what people say. Quiet men know what people mean. That's why in business, in leadership, in life, the quiet man always gains the upper hand. People underestimate silence. They confuse it for passivity. They think if you're not speaking, you're not thinking. But they forget. Wolves don't howl when they hunt. They stalk, they watch, they wait. And when the moment comes, they act with precision. Every loud man exposes himself without realizing it. He reveals his greed, his insecurities, his intentions, all because he can't stand the pressure of silence. But a quiet man thrives in it. Silence is his advantage. It forces others to act emotionally while he acts logically. It makes others reveal themselves while he remains unreadable. Quiet men succeed not because they know more, but because they notice more. While others are distracted by their own need for validation, the silent man gathers information, patterns, and truths. He sees the room before the room sees him. And that's what makes him dangerous. Because a man who sees deeply, who observes without being observed, becomes impossible to deceive, impossible to manipulate, impossible to ambush. People can lie to him, but their bodies won't. Their tone won't. Their eyes won't. Their silence won't. He catches what others overlook. And that skill, that awareness, is a form of power most men never learn to wield. Quiet men don't speak often because they don't need to. When they finally talk, they talk with accuracy, with insight, with authority. Their words carry weight because they are born from observation, not impulse. And that is why loud men fall behind, and quiet men rise. Because the world rewards those who can see what others ignore. Silence forces others to show their hand. Most men talk because they fear the quiet. Silence makes them uncomfortable, exposed, like standing under a spotlight with nowhere to hide. So they fill it with words, hoping their noise will distract you from their intentions. But a man who carries silence with confidence breaks them without lifting a finger. Thomas Shelby understands this better than anyone. He knows that if he waits long enough, if he keeps the room in stillness, someone else will crack first. Someone else will talk. Someone else will expose more than they meant to. That is the power of silence. It makes the weak reveal themselves. When you refuse to speak, when you refuse to rush, when you hold your calm like a blade across the table, the world begins to panic. People start explaining things you never asked about. They start defending themselves against accusations you never made. They confess fears you didn't know they had. Because silence acts like a mirror. It forces people to stare into their own motives, their own guilt, their own insecurity. This is why silence is a weapon, not because it hides your hand, but because it exposes theirs. Most people can't handle pressure, and silence is pressure. A pressure that increases with every second they wait for your reaction. Every moment you don't respond. Every time you keep your expression cold, unreadable, untouched by emotion. A loud man thinks he's controlling the conversation by dominating it. But the one who listens, the one who speaks least, controls the tempo. He decides when the truth surfaces. He decides when the game shifts. He decides when the other man collapses into honesty. Thomas Shelby rarely wins by force. He wins by silence, by waiting for the exact moment the other person reveals too much. A hesitation, a nervous laugh, a contradiction, a slip of the tongue. He sees it all, because silence gives him room to observe, while the other man rushes to cover the very thing he doesn't want seen. A man who cannot hold silence is a man who cannot hold power. People talk themselves into corners. They expose their weaknesses because they cannot sit with their own thoughts. They admit their fears because they cannot stand the stillness. They reveal their true intentions because they want your validation. And all you have to do is say nothing. Imagine that, winning a negotiation, a conflict, an argument, not through aggression, but through patience. A silent man is not passive. He's strategic. He's choosing his moment, calculating his outcome, allowing the other person to step deeper into the trap of their own anxiety. They begin to wonder what you're thinking, what you know, what you figured out, and their fear makes them expose more than you ever needed to ask for. The man who speaks least learns the most. The man who reacts least controls the room. The man who shows nothing gains everything. Silence makes you unpredictable. It makes you unreadable, and something that cannot be read, cannot be defeated. When you speak, the world knows your position. When you stay silent, the world must guess, and people fear what they cannot understand. That is why silence forces others to show their hand. While they scramble to understand you, they end up revealing themselves. A silent mind is an unbreakable mind. Chaos doesn't frighten a man who can remain still. Pain doesn't control a man who can sit with it quietly. The world tries to push, pull, twist, and provoke you, but a silent mind is untouchable. Thomas Shelby learned this early. Men will try to break you in every way possible. Some with words, some with knives, some with betrayal. Most people react, most crumble, most let chaos rule their thoughts. But a man who masters silence, masters everything. Silence is not absence. It is discipline. It is the ability to face danger without letting your pulse betray you. It is the ability to watch the world fall apart and yet remain a steady line in the storm. Every second you don't react to provocation. Every moment you hold your expression unflinching. You strengthen the fortress inside your mind. Control becomes a habit. Calm becomes instinct. And instinct becomes power. Thomas Shelby's strength was never in force. It was in restraint, in the ability to absorb the pressure, the insults, the betrayals, without allowing them to influence his decisions. Every man can lash out. Every man can react. But the rare few, they hold their thoughts. They hold their anger. They hold their fear. And when the time comes, they act with precision. A single move, executed with deadly efficiency, while everyone else is still tangled in their own chaos. A silent mind perceives everything. It notices what others overlook, the subtle tension in a room, the hidden motives, the small cracks in character. It calculates without interference from emotion, weighing every possibility, predicting outcomes with clarity that others cannot comprehend. And because your mind is still, your enemies cannot manipulate you. They cannot provoke you. They cannot anticipate you. You have become the storm, contained but unstoppable. The world is designed to distract you, to enrage you, to make you speak before thinking. But the unbreakable man resists. He listens more than he talks. He observes more than he reacts. He learns while others expose themselves. And in that learning, in that quiet endurance, he gains an advantage. No anger, no shouting, no force could ever provide. Thomas Shelby's silence was never passive. It was a weapon honed through suffering, discipline, and understanding. A weapon aimed not at others' bodies, but at their minds. Because a man who controls his inner world, it cannot be controlled by the outer one. Silence makes the mind sharp. Silence makes the man unshakable. Silence makes the impossible inevitable. The men who fall are the ones who react. The men who survive are the ones who wait. The men who conquer are the ones who hold their silence until the world has revealed everything, and then strike with precision. A silent mind is an unbreakable mind, and an unbreakable mind is the ultimate power. Conclusion: strength lives in silence. The world is loud, full of men who shout, argue, and react before they think. They expose themselves with every word, every twitch, every unguarded glance, and they wonder why they fail. But the man who masters silence, he is untouchable. He moves through chaos without flinching. He watches while others stumble. He waits while others reveal their intentions. He acts only when the time is perfect, and victory is inevitable. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a strategy. Silence is power. A man who controls his thoughts, his reactions, his emotions, cannot be manipulated, cannot be provoked, cannot be predicted. Thomas Shelby didn't survive because he was loud. He survived because he was calm, because he waited, because he understood that the world reveals itself to the patient, the disciplined, the silent. Strength lives in silence, not in shouting, not in an impulsive action, not in emotion. It lives in restraint. It lives in observation. It lives in the unbreakable mind that refuses to be moved by chaos, fear, or provocation. If you want to rise, if you want to endure, if you want to dominate your life, your business, your battlefield, then learn this. Speak less, watch more, think longer, act sharper. Let the world reveal itself. And when it does, strike with precision. Because the silent man, it is the man who wins. And in silence, strength becomes unstoppable.